In this lesson, we're looking at God's unchangeable law of marriage and divorce. As we all know, and especially those of us that are older, that man's law continually changes. In fact, it's always amazing how it continually changes. But God's law is permanent. Now, this is true also for God's law of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. In Matthew the 19th chapter and verse 9, Jesus said, "And I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away, doth commit adultery." Now the context indicates the law applied to all men. The context is actually from the beginning, and Jesus pointed it out, which indicates that God's law has always been for one man and one woman until death. Not two men, not two women, but one man and one woman until death. Now Jesus also said in our text of verse 9, he said, "Whosoever," or "whoso." Well, that indicates that it's a law given for all men. It's not just for members of the church. It's not for just religious people, but it's for all men, whosoever. And God's law has always been the same. Now, Matthew 19 verse 9 is really not all that difficult. But sometimes people will say they simply do not understand. Well, consider another passage then. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 32, now this is in the context of the Sermon on the Mount, and we all know how important the Sermon on the Mount is. But in that sermon, Jesus said, "But I say unto you, that whosoever shall put away his wife, except for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery. And whosoever shall marry her that is divorced, committeth adultery." Now this is within the text of, or the Sermon on the Mount, as we mentioned. Jesus, in this passage, also used whosoever, which makes this apply to every person. Now, the only scriptural reason for divorce, according to those texts that we've read thus far, is fornication. Now, fornication is a broad term that has reference to all kinds of sexual sins. Now, sometimes people get it confused with adultery because that word is used there, but adultery is one form of fornication. Other forms of fornication might be homosexuality or, well, there's a number of different things. And so notice that a person who has been divorced for fornication is not eligible to remarry. That is, not eligible to remarry with God's approval. Now, can they remarry? Well, yeah, the national laws will allow that to take place. But we're talking about God's law. Remember, man's law constantly changes. God's law is always firm. It never changes. So, yes, man's law, they can remarry, but not so with God's law. Also, the person who marries the fornicator commits adultery. And just remember that no adulterer has a part in the kingdom of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 9. But then people will still say, "Well, I just don't understand." Well, if that be the case, then let's look at another passage. In Mark, the 10th chapter, verses 11 and 12, Jesus said on that occasion, "And he saith unto them, Whosoever shall put away his wife, and marry another, committeth adultery against her. And if a woman shall put away her husband, and be married to another, she committeth adultery." Now notice in this particular passage, Jesus broadened the scope here. It's gender neutral. Now, what do I mean by gender neutral? Not gender neutral, one man and one man being married, or one woman and one woman being married. Not in that sense, but it's gender neutral. A man may put away his wife because of fornication, and a woman may put away her husband because of fornication. That's what we mean by gender neutral. In other words, it's not just for the men, it's also for the women. Jesus was clear in his teaching. However, some will again say, well, I just don't understand. Well, if that be the case, then consider another passage. In Luke, the 16th chapter, in verse 18, Luke recorded the words of Jesus again. Whosoever putteth away his wife and marrieth another committeth adultery. And whosoever marrieth her that is put away from her husband committeth adultery. In this particular passage, as in others, Jesus said, whosoever, indicating it's for all men. And once again, any reasonable person must conclude Jesus was distinct and he was precise in his teaching. However, there are always those who will not and refuse to understand. But then let's consider one more passage. In Malachi 2 and verse 16, Malachi recorded, for the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit that ye deal not treacherously. Now in that particular passage, Malachi, by inspiration, said he hates divorce, or he hateth putting away. And that word can be translated divorce. Have you ever considered why God hates divorce? Well, we know that God hates sin. And please honestly consider this. Divorce always involves sin. If a divorce is because of fornication, clearly sin is involved. The sin of fornication is involved. If a divorce is not for fornication, then the divorce itself is sin. So divorce always involves sin. And if that be the case, no wonder God said that he hates divorce. These things are not difficult. Any reasonable person can understand it. Let us do as God instructs. And let us be the kind of people. And let us work out the things within our marriage that we might remain together. Hopefully these things will help you and will assist you in being determined to live as one man or one woman until death with your husband or with your wife.